Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Gridiron Gridlock with your host, Trevor. I am finally back. Yes, last week I was off. I had a drive from Ohio to Pennsylvania for Thanksgiving, ladies and gentlemen. So I wanted to give a huge shout out to Ben and Zane for filling in for me for last week. They did a great job covering for Gridiron Gridlock. Thank you so much, guys. Fantastic job. We'd love to have you guys on when I'm not traveling so we can have a bigger show, bigger fan base, keep growing it. Love to hear that. But also, ladies and gentlemen, it is rivalry weekend. It's finally here. We had some great action Friday night. So we're going to do a quick recap of that. Go into some today's matchups where conference championship games are on the line, ladies and gentlemen. You can't get better than this magnitude, and you're going to start to get those crazy scenarios of the what ifs for certain teams to get into the college football playoffs. Does Texas ever have enough luck on their side to slip on in as being the first 3-loss team to get in? Does the team up north have a chance to get in by knocking off the number one team in the country who's been there since basically week 2 all the way up to week 13 as the clear number one team in the nation? Is it enough to springboard them in since they're sitting at 15? There's just so much in the world of college football going on, ladies and gentlemen. But we got to thank today's sponsor, Novik. Whether it's NBA, MLB, NHL, college football, hoops, you name it, they got it. Golf, you can bet on it with Novik with a market-driven odds that go in your favor to help you win a lot of the time. Now, there is no better experience than peer-to-peer experience, ladies and gentlemen, but there's no hidden fees on top of that. So it's all the funds that you can get. So use the code ETB Network, ladies and gentlemen, ETB Network as your code. And when you do it, you can sign up and get 1,000 Novik coins and a $5 cash back from Novik itself. So make sure you do it. Definitely sign up. It's a great app and it's a fun to use. Definitely used it on this network a few times with colleagues and friends. So get out there and go do it. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the world of college football. The games, the magnitude, it is beautiful, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to get to it with a nice sharing of the screen. If my screen was going to allow me to share, it might be one of those episodes where I can't share. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the games that is going on this week for college football. Well, my screen froze, but I can still see the whole recordings. Lovely jubbly. But we're talking about Texas A&M last night. What a thrill-seeking game on top of that, ladies and gentlemen. It was a thriller, barn burner of a finish, but Texas find a way. Oh, well, here we go. We're still there. But Texas A&M final score 27-17, ladies and gentlemen. It was a game that has been a destined on Texas record. I put that as one of my picks for Texas to end up pulling the upset. I think they just had a better offense, and Texas A&M doesn't have that defense that they need to get the job done, ladies and gentlemen. So we're not going to share our screen because it's causing my computer to freeze this time around. So we are just going to press on with what we got, and we're just going to go from there. We're going to get the old school phone going to get us through as well. So just the game of Texas A&M, ladies and gentlemen. Texas showed out and tried to make a statement. Should they have went in and scored it in the final few minutes of the fourth quarter, ladies and gentlemen? I mean, that is still debatable. I think they needed that 17 on the number 3 team in the nation instead of getting away with 10 points, ladies and gentlemen. But that's going to have to do. Hopefully the committee values it. But the thing that's hanging over Texas's head, you lost the number 1 team in the country now, Ohio State, by 7. You lose to Georgia by 35-10, and then you have that loss of Florida hanging over their head, which is not great. They didn't have that loss to Florida. They might be in discussion of getting in to the college football playoffs right now, but they are sitting so far back. They're sitting at 16, and Michigan is sitting on top of them, so it makes it such a longer drive for them to get there and make progress happen for them on that front. Now, when you look at that, that's great and dandy, but we also got to look what happened to Georgia Tech. that's impacting the ACC, which has basically eliminated them from the college football playoffs across the board. And they had a great year on top of that, but it came to short. But looking at that game, ladies and gentlemen, Georgia only scored 16 in Georgia Tech. So Georgia Tech was a good team all year. They just fell short in that game. If they won that game, it would have springboarded them up a little bit, but I don't think it would be enough to put them in the top 12, ladies and gentlemen. So with Georgia and Georgia Tech battling it out, taking care of business, and Georgia moving up. Now the question asked, Ohio State 1, Indiana 2, 3 Georgia. Then at that point, you move Texas Tech up into 4 and everybody else. I think the lowest that you can drop A&M is probably number 7, ladies and gentlemen. So Ole Miss gets to move up. Oklahoma gets to move up, I want to say. So it's very keen on to where we're going to put this A&M team. They're definitely still going to get a home field playoff game. But the beauty of it is they don't have to worry about the SEC championship game. Because if Georgia loses to Alabama in the SEC title game, now Georgia has a loss on top of that, and you have a possible revenge scenario for Alabama to knock off Georgia, which will be quite crazy on how the committee will end up seeding those teams if that does happen in the SEC title game. Now, in other stances, Arizona State, I believe Arizona ended up becoming the victor in that game. So very great fashion on top of that, ladies and gentlemen. So very good stuff that happened. North Texas took care of business in the group of 5 at large, but they're still not ranked yet. So we'll see where the committee ranks them coming up into conference championship weekend. Hopefully they get ranked so when we can start talking about the group of 5 of getting them in closer and closer to the college football playoffs, ladies and gentlemen. But the games that we're looking at today, this Saturday on rivalry weekend, part of this is the key games of Ohio State, Michigan, Miami, and Pitt. Texas Tech and West Virginia is kind of straightforward. Texas Tech should win. But Miami and Pitt is a key game. Miami's not playing in the ACC title game. So there is still an at-large bid for the ACC championship game, which is quite insane as we look at it. But if anything shakes up where they start eliminating each other, there's not really a high ranking. We could possibly get 2 group of 5s in, depending on how the committee ranks North Texas, which would be crazy to watch. Now, we all start thinking about the college football playoffs on the lines of, is the first round not necessary because the teams aren't good enough and there's clearly domination from the first year that we saw it, and there were a lot of blowouts. Now, if we look at it now, I feel like if it's more of a lot of the bigger schools playing against each other, the firepower is somewhat similar, and you have a little bit more of a game that we have. So, like Oregon playing Ole Miss, that should be a good game, but it could be like a Tennessee Ohio State game where it sounds great on paper, but then when you actually play, it just turns lopsided. I think that's what everyone's fearing. But then now there's always talks of expanding the field to 16 teams, which I don't think is necessary. I think 12 is good where we are. I personally wanted 8 teams or 6 teams because I feel like the top 6 or 8 schools are actually your true national championship teams. Like that 1 or 2 losses will still keep you within the top 6, top 8. I think you could stretch it to the top 8 to afford, those 2 lost teams getting through, where you have a mix up and an out of conference game, but then you have an in conference loss. So like it kind of balances itself out with an 8-team format. I mean, you could do 10 teams, and it doesn't add itself up well when you're looking at who gets buys and all that stuff. So you have to do, the whole 12-team format. I do love the at-large bids, and also having your conference championships get you a bid, but doesn't give you that buy that they corrected from last year, which I think we all think that conference championship bye really messed up onto how some of the season seedings ended up unfolding out, ladies and gentlemen. But let's just dive in for the first game at noon, about 50 minutes to the hour. Ohio State, Michigan. We're looking at this game, ladies and gentlemen. Ohio State, easy. I wouldn't say easy task, but the goal is win out and you stay number 1. Now, if you lose, you get shuffled around in the mix because at that point you're not playing the Big Ten title game. Oregon's playing, and if Oregon loses to Indiana, then it just opens up another field can of worms because that might knock Oregon out and put Michigan in. So it's definitely one of those things where it's like Ohio State, do you want to play mind games in the Big Ten? And I wouldn't say I lose this game, but on the lines of having Oregon take an L and eliminating Oregon within that, because Indiana did beat Oregon in Eugene, ladies and gentlemen. So if Ohio State doesn't want to deal with Oregon, like they could technically do that, but at the same time, you don't want to start a 5-streak loss to Michigan on top of that. Like if it was a different year, maybe you want to play that card, but I don't think you want to lose to your rival. I think you get the job done and you have no controversy of letting your rival get into the college football playoffs and giving you a headache late in the playoff run, and you face them and it's like, well, now here we go, facing them again type of mentality. So like beat them now, put them out of their misery. But the weather forecast up there, there's a possible chance of snow, but that's not supposed to start until like late in the afternoon, more towards the when the game ends. However, that could easily shift because I know going into the mix, ladies and gentlemen, there's like a 20% chance like leading up to like noon kickoff. But as it gets closer, the percentage starts to increase. So it's one of those lines where we have to keep a close eye on what that ends up looking like, ladies and gentlemen, on top of that, in that mindset. But Ohio State has to play as like they have been. Throw the ball, work your plays, and let your defense hold Michigan's offense at bay. Like that's what you got to do in this scenario. Like you got to keep them control. But at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, Michigan loves a good grinded out Big Ten football game where they want to keep it close. They want to run the clock down so they can just win by one possession. Like to them, just win. It doesn't matter how you win, you just got to win it. So it's the two states where you have the flashy sports car in Ohio State and the grinded out, I wouldn't say truck, but like the workhorse of Michigan where they just grind you down. So that's what we're doing. The weather is, I think, like in the 20s, so it's definitely a little bit chillier, but that's how it is in November. That is Big Ten football. I don't think you can get around it. You don't play at a neutral site for this game. It is the game for a reason. You got to find a way to get the job done. Find a way to win in this magnitude of this game. Now, for Michigan to get into the Big Ten championship game, they have to have two things that happens. They beat Ohio State, and Oregon loses to Washington, which is probable, scenarios that they could happen. So they have to take one thing at a time and see what happens. With Oregon and Washington can give Oregon a headache, and it just stalls them out for some odd reason. They just can't get the job done. But that's like 3:30, and it's in Washington, ladies and gentlemen. So it's going to be a road game for Oregon. But the thing is, Oregon just has to win out. They don't have to play in the Big Ten title game. They lost to Indiana, and they're at a really good seat if they stay the number 6 team in the country. However, with A&M losing, they're getting bumped up to 5. So they're not coveted, possibly, getting an at-large group of 5 bid, taking on the number 4 team, which would be Texas Tech. So that looks really good on paper. However, you would get Ohio State in the semifinals if Ohio State holds on to the 1 seed. So a lot of things to unfold definitely in the Big Ten for sure, ladies and gentlemen, on top of that. But I mean, even when you look at it, it's not that bad. Not too many crazy scenarios. Like they're all probable versus like they need this. But again, there's the scenario where let's say Indiana wins out, Oregon loses, Ohio State loses today. Where do you put Michigan? Do they get into the college football playoffs? Do they have enough? There's teams sitting in front of them. Like Utah won yesterday on top of that. Like they took care of business and won. But Vanderbilt's playing Tennessee, so if Tennessee wins, that knocks off Vanderbilt and moves Michigan up. But then you have Texas that slingshots up from beating A&M. But if you beat number 1, like you're staying on top of Texas because you have the transmittive property coming into play where Ohio State beat Texas. So in theory, Michigan is better than Texas in that sense. if you look at that. But then you have the argument saying it's not the same team that they're looking at from week 1 to week 13. You got two different football teams, from a team that's feeling it out, trying to get their punches in, to a team that's trying to do knockout blows in a heavyweight fight. That's the best analogy I could come up with, ladies and gentlemen. So bear with me on that logic. But the thing we want to look into after the game, ladies and gentlemen, is Miami versus Pitt. Where we're at right now, ladies and gentlemen, technically the ACC championship game is tied up between Virginia and Pitt. Virginia's 18 and Pitt is 22. Georgia Tech falls out, so Miami ends up getting moved up into the ACC picture, ladies and gentlemen. And SMU is kind of sitting idle, but they do play today, I believe. And SMU, who does SMU have, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, wow. You got a lot of games. So, they're playing Cal today. I don't think they're going to have too much issues with Cal, ladies and gentlemen, on top of that. So we're going to keep it close on top. But like I said, there is not much hope for them at this point. Now, you have the crazy scenario, what could unfold, of Virginia losing today. Who's Virginia? Probably Virginia Tech. Where is it? But as I'm scrolling for it, let's say Virginia loses today in this scenario, and Pitt loses today, and SMU loses today. Then you have some weird tiebreakers going on top of that. So the fluctuation of who gets in what makes it more of a dramatic fashion now, ladies and gentlemen, on top of that. So let me see if I can find Virginia in this mix up. I'm just going to do Control F. Nope, it's taking way too long. But, ladies and gentlemen, I will say that the ACC still is being a dramatic fashion on how it's shaking itself out. So keep a close eye on those games. Like, flip back to them when your game is on commercial break, or you're watching the Michigan Ohio State game, or you're bouncing back and forth with Miami Pitt, to keep those games to see how those unfold. But also at the same time, as we go later into the day, there's still moves being made for these schools to get into the college football playoffs. Now let's take a look at the Big 12 right now, ladies and gentlemen, going up into, what's going on. So in the Big 12, we have 4 teams that are basically in the position what's going to go down today. You got Texas Tech playing West Virginia today. You got BYU playing UCF. I think Utah ended up winning against Kansas. So Utah's locked in right now for the number 3 seed. And then Arizona State lost. So Arizona State's out of the picture. So we're really down to what happens to Texas Tech and BYU. You have the head-to-head. So I don't know how Utah jumps up and plays into the Big 12 title game. I'm not sure what the tiebreaker is, but both of those schools have the head-to-head. So in theory, I feel like if one of them loses, I think they still get in. But for Utah winning it out and within the Big 12 title game, if BYU loses, Utah can get in being as a 10-2 team, which is not too bad. Like, they're kind of controlling their own destiny. They took care of business yesterday. So, like, they're pretty much in a great spot, if you ask me. But, like, a Utah fan is just praying for chaos on the top, but not too much chaos from the bottom where they get bypassed. So, really what they want to have happen is Miami to lose and Utah gets to start to climb. Or if BYU loses, then like they might have to play in the Big 12 title game, but you don't want that. You don't want to play because you're a 10-2 team and getting a third loss eliminates you. So like you want to win, to move up, but then you kind of are scared about your conference title game because, like for A&M, they don't have to play in the SEC title game, but they're a one-loss team and they don't get eliminated. But if Georgia loses to Alabama again, then Georgia's on the fence of being eliminated, which is insane to sound on paper, but that's the world that Georgia has to live in. But oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, the Big 12 is could get 3 teams in, but most likely they'll get 2 teams in for sure, no questions asked. On top of that, ladies and gentlemen, so if we look into the Big 10, this is where I was mentioning earlier the dynamic of what's to have happen. Indiana took care of Purdue, so Indiana's locked into the Big 10 championship game. Done. Now it boils down to Ohio State and Michigan. They will mess things up, but Oregon is sitting in third place. So if Ohio State loses, Oregon goes in to revenge their loss and possibly become the new number 1 team in the nation for beating Indiana at the Big Ten championship game. But does Oregon want the number 1 bid again? I think for them, they want to capture the crown of the Big Ten and go back to back and just make a statement about how good the Big Ten actually was. Well, not was, is. And then you start having the discussion was how good the Pac-12 was, but they didn't have ranked opponents to back up their resumes to get into the college football playoffs more often. Because when you looked at the field at those times from 2014 to national championship game up to the last 12 team format, the Pac-12 had 2 lost teams, but they beat each other up so badly in conference play, they get left out because they lost to a non-ranked team when everyone else in the Power 5 at the time loses to a ranked team, and that ranked team is still ranked by the end of the season. So it's like it hurts. It hurt like Oregon. It hurt USC. It hurt Washington a little bit. Like there's just something that the Pac-12 had that the whole breakdown of it and just not having that strength of schedule hurt a lot of those teams that could have been in the playoffs and maybe had a national title appearance if the luck was in their favor. But you can't control how the committees are going to rank teams. What do you do when you can't control that? Like outside of the money grab of joining the Big Ten, like the Pac-12 on paper, if Oregon can go back to back, it speaks volumes to what the Pac-12 was. And now, granted, Oregon can create a great team every once in a while. They can sit there and ride, but having back-to-back Big Ten titles in your first and second year in the Big Ten, that speaks volumes in itself. But now we got to look at, like I said, I broke down the Michigan scenario. They need both. They need to take care of Ohio State, take care of Oregon. So if Oregon loses, now here's the question. Let's say that crazy scenario happens. Michigan knocks off the number 1 team in the country in Ohio State and Indiana in the Big Ten championship game, which will probably be another number 1. So you knock off 2 number 1s in back-to-back weeks. Where do you put this Michigan team? Is it enough to give them a bye? That's the question that people are going to start to asking. It's how much you win it today and how much you win in the Big Ten title game. Like if you have 2 signature great wins, you might have them slipping as a 2 because they'll probably keep Georgia as a 1 and make Michigan 2. I think we all know how the committee is going to rank that, and we all know the bias behind the committee behind it. But I don't think you can do that. I think you have to find a way to get Michigan in the top 4 for knocking off 2 number 1s in 2 consecutive weeks. But do I think that's going to happen? No. They're not. They're going to make them 5. I don't think you can jump them that far up, but it's a steady climb. But we have to keep a close eye on what that actually shakes out to be. Now, if we look at the SEC, ladies and gentlemen, going in to this week, you already got the crazy scenario of Georgia Tech being in. Now, I think right now Alabama has a shot to get in, but if they don't, then I want to say Old Miss gets in. Like, there's a weird combination of things that need to happen. And with A&M losing, Georgia's now in without a problem. And Georgia took care of Georgia Tech. So, like, Georgia's locked in, and Alabama is about to go in, I believe. But from what I captured the rankings, like, Old Miss is there. So, I really want to say that I forget who Old Miss's lost to is on top of that. So, just doing a quick peek. But yeah, their only loss of the season now, ladies and gentlemen, was to Georgia, which is why Georgia has the um, head to head. But however, Alabama beat Georgia. Thus, why if Alabama wins the Iron Bowl, they'll go in. That's what we're looking at with common faced opponents on that, ladies and gentlemen. So we have basically a possible Georgia Alabama SEC title game when we thought we could get like maybe an A&M Georgia matchup, but here we are going back to the old SEC of the playoff era where you had two dominant teams of the SEC fighting it out and getting it through. So that's relatively it for the SEC. I mean, Auburn's not going to derail Alabama, but it is rivalry weekend and they can cause pandemonium, which we're all here for college football. We love the drama that it produces. And everyone will talk about where does my team sit in the rankings. We can pull pins and needles out of certain things, say my team gets in because XYZ reason, but then you have an also counter argument with ABC reasoning. So it's the drama of it all. The committee sits down, figures it out, and it just goes into town from that point forward. But I mean, outside of that, conference championship is ironing out pretty well for a few minor scenarios outside the ACC, which is a headache to break down and figure out who gets in if they all lose the day. And Pitt wins. Like it is a mess, and I do not want to deal with this scenario where Miami wins and then the whole ACC title game. It is a wacky bunch, and I think that's probably the games that people are going to try to figure out to keep a close eye on, even though there's games that will swing some of the other playoff spots. But the ACC bid is very at large, and all those teams can beat each other. So watching that develop and unfold will be a lovely experience to partake and watch. But outside of those, ladies and gentlemen, let's just look at some of the fun rivalry games that we got going on this week. I mean, you got LSU, Oklahoma should be fun to watch. But the game that it doesn't really have playoff implication, but does is Vanderbilt, Tennessee, where Vanderbilt's sitting at 14. Going up against Tennessee, who has a high-powered offense. And they took Georgia in overtime, should beat Georgia, but their kicker missed the kick, and they end up losing in overtime. So it's one of those things where if Tennessee won that game, they'd be higher up, and this would be a playoff elimination game that we're witnessing on rivalry weekend. But for Vanderbilt, they win, don't play in the they don't play in the SEC title game, and they just sit idle. Like it's perfect. They don't get jumped, and it's in a great spot. But again, we'll have to see what the committee values on how they end up beating Tennessee. Now, if Tennessee caused some pandemonium knocking off Vanderbilt, again, it starts creeping up the discussion of what happens going in to conference championship weekend. Where do teams sit who will become idle not playing in the conference championship game? But we'll keep a close eye on that one, ladies and gentlemen. You can catch the Vanderbilt and Tennessee game at 3:30 on ESPN. So that is a great 3:30 game, along with Oregon and Washington, also at 3:30 on CBS. I mean, you really got three beautiful games at the 3:30 side. Like I said, you got Oklahoma and LSU also in that same bid as well. But also going up on top of that, um, going into Wake Forest and Duke. Duke also has a weird scenario of getting into, I wouldn't say the ACC title game picture, but also just lurking around in the whole mix of it all. With that, ladies and gentlemen, but another great rivalry game on top of that is Wisconsin, Minnesota at 3:30 on FS1. Great matchup going into that one, even though there's no stake, but it's a great rivalry to participate and watch in, ladies and gentlemen. But Missouri, Arkansas on the SEC network on top of that, and other games in the mix. I know you got Kennesaw State and Liberty. But as we get later into the night, Virginia Tech, 7 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. This is an elimination game in the ACC. Like I said, ACC has way too many weird outcomes on top of that going into, ladies and gentlemen. But also you have another great matchup, the Iron Bowl, Alabama-Auburn at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on ABC, going into UCLA, USC, also in that time slot at 7:30 on NBC, ladies and gentlemen. So the days just keeps adding up for great college football. So get your tailgating foods and snacks, have leftover Thanksgiving. You're going to be in for a long slot from sun up to sundown. You just got to enjoy it. Then you have other good rivalries in there. Northwestern Illinois, SMU, Cal. But then you got Notre Dame and Stanford. Now, if Notre Dame loses to Stanford, what happens to the bid, ladies and gentlemen, for Notre Dame? What happens to that bid? Because everyone has a discussion. Notre Dame is sitting high over top of Miami, even though Miami won the head-to-head. But there are two teams. Notre Dame doesn't play for a conference championship, and Miami's not playing in it. So how are you going to rank these teams when they played each other at the beginning of the year and the committee saying it's two different teams on top of that? So not too much many more movement that you could really hope for that scenario, but we'll just continue looking at. And then obviously you're capping at the night at 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, which is not a televised game, Wyoming and Hawaii at Hawaii. So that is a very late kick. Wish it was being put on an application where you could watch. So that is literally, I guess, a Mountain West after dark. But ladies and gentlemen, what are you looking for in this rivalry weekend? Do you want teams to be very consistent and make it easy for the committee? Or do you want to make it very, very difficult for the committee? Or you leave a good team out that actually belongs in, but their numbers and stats are not adding up in the committee's eyes to get them through? Now, looking at conference championship weekend, what do teams need to do who get in? The easy scenario, you win and you're fine. But if you lose, you can't get blown out. If you get blown out in your conference championship game, it's a big question mark on where you sit and do you get eliminated based off the embarrassing loss. That is what people are questioning, which as the college football playoff continues, do teams throw rivalry week away and purposely lose that game so you don't play in your conference championship game and get punished with that loss? Again, losing is bad in both scenarios. But if you're undefeated up to that point and you have one of the top 4 teams, you will sit in the middle of the pack and get a home field playoff games and get a tune-up and go great into the quarterfinal matchups instead of the first round. So that December 19th and 20th picture with home playoffs has weight to it because we saw when Ohio State did. They played, and all the teams that did the plan kind of beat the teams that had a bye going into the New Year's on top of that. So it's one of those scenarios where does playing that extra week add value? Now, we'll also get to that argument where does playing that game actually hurt your team and being worn out because you had to play one extra game compared to the teams that had a bye? I think we need to look at that as what college football will develop into and how the student athletes will grow and develop to that dynamic. But also, if the playoffs expand, now you're getting 3 lost teams who lose to teams in the top 25 and they get in and they get on a hot streak and win the whole thing. So, um, I don't know how you end up evaluating that across the board in general of what that looks like. But I think it's one of the things we have to sit there and look at. Like, if we expand the field to 16 teams, do we get 2 rounds of home playoff games? And does that start the week before? Like, that turns into a big question of where do you put the Army Navy game if you expand the playoff bracket? Because the Army Navy game, I believe, takes place December 13th and 14th. But if you expand that, Navy and Army can't participate that well because they still got that game unless they move it to one of their bye weeks. I think we have to look at that as a possible problem if we expand it and they go to December 13th. Now, if they don't do that and they leave that week alone, we can have a deeper January, which is the alternative option. But I don't think the college football committee is going to do that because you start running into the NFL Super Bowl, but like you're running into the division rounds of the NFL, you're fighting for TV space and all that stuff. I don't think they want to do that. They would probably want to monopolize December as much as they can. And you might start reworking some of the bowl games, but how does that impact the Army Navy game if you expand the playoff field? Because for them, in a weird hypothetical scenario, let's say Navy wins the American. They play on the first weekend of December. They play Army on the 13th, and then they go in the first round of playoffs. Like, that's how that works out. Versus teams that have a bye, they don't have to do that. Like, it's a tough stretch. So if one of those 2 academies go through, they will have the highest undefeated possible record that you could have probably ever imagine on top of that. Now, I like that hypothetical, but man, that is a lot of games on the human body to just get through that. Yes, I know pro players can do it, but a college kid, a kid that's 18 playing that many games, let that sink in when you don't have that first round bye. Like, you have to play those games. Like, that is wear and tear on an individual that we just don't know what that looks like. Like, do players, I mean, a lot of times in college football, when a team's up, they start benching players. But when you're the military academies, you're not really blowing out teams. Like, a lot of those games are close. So, like, if you're a starter, you're playing every single game on top of that. So, let's take it is for what it is and break it down to details of how that irons itself out. I think they're probably going to shift it deeper in January, and that solves all the problems, and they don't do it. But still, do the military academies get that bye week on December 13th and they move their Army Navy game, played earlier in the year? I don't think you can do that. The cadets probably look forward to that date, the second weekend of December, and they play their game. Like, I don't think you can get rid of that tradition. It's like moving your rivalry weekend game. Like, it's that important to those schools. Like, you move it, it's not the same weight. Like, you lose that competitive bond over your rival if you have to shift it around. We saw that with Texas and Texas A&M where they went different conferences and the rivalry phased out, but now it's back and you got hard-nosed football and the dramatic fashion. Like, we also saw that with Pitt and West Virginia, the backyard brawl. Like, they stopped playing each other, and when they came back, it was an electric game to have back. So it's one of those things, like, rivalries for schools at the college level have so much weight. I don't think people really realize that for some of them. Like, with the Big Ten expanding, Ohio State and Penn State don't play every year. Like, getting that into some people's heads where it's like, oh, I could be like, oh, I can go to Penn State next year. They're coming here. Like, there will be 2 years where I don't see Penn State on my schedule. Like, I can't go to Happy Valley to watch Ohio State play Penn State. Like, it's just going to happen like that. And there will be years where we don't always play Rutgers. We don't play, Oregon. We don't play UCLA. We don't play everyone in the Big Ten, which makes the conference championship games harder to decipher. And you get weird tie breaks of teams who actually belong and teams that don't belong getting in because the schedule is vastly different. Like, if you look at Indiana's schedule, they didn't have to face Ohio State this year. They only had to face Penn State, who had no quarterback, and within an interim head coach, and they almost lost that game. But then they beat Oregon by 10 in a convincing fashion. Like, they just were that lucky this year. That's what we're looking at. They're just that lucky. And now can they finish the year off with a great shot at the Big Ten title? It's first in program history, ladies and gentlemen. It's first in program history for Indiana, I believe, to reach the Big Ten championship game. That is huge for this program. And doing it against the number one team in the country, you're number one versus number two. This is really unheard of for this Indiana program. On top of that, like, they're going to go and try to win, guns a-blazing, and get the job done. I think that's what they're going up against. So, how do we look at that? The magnitude for Indiana. Them having a perfect season, I believe first in program history, maybe not, or at least for 12 wins in a season. But, hey, they're in the conference championship game. The question is, if they lose, how far they drop. That's where we're starting to talk about. For losing, how far you drop. We are in the drama, and every drama always has a downfall. And with every downfall, a champion rises. We saw that last year with Ohio State. They lost. They didn't play in the Big Ten championship game. Penn State has an easier pathway. Ohio State has one of the hardest pathways in playoff history with the current format expansion. We're in year 2. Does another team have the guts to go that similar gauntlet where you're facing those top 10 teams to get to the promised land, to lift the holy grail, and to say that you are a national championship team? National championship teams have that special moment that separates them from the field. And if we look at every team that played in the college football playoffs, there was something special about each one of those teams to win that national championship game, or a special moment that solidified them as a national championship winner. But, I mean, Ohio State was in the national championship during COVID, but again, the schedule and all that stuff, it wasn't pretty on how it all ended up shaking itself out. Indiana could have been to the Big Ten championship game, but they had the head-to-head loss to Ohio State. Ohio State didn't fulfill the requirements to get into the Big Ten championship game that year, but the Big Ten committee put them in anyway. So COVID was a weird year. That championship will always have an asterisk to it because the schedules, not every team played a full season, only conference play. Like, it was a mess across the board of what we're just going to look at that. But then you have so much more into college football, just in general, just so much going on. But like I said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a little look more at the Big Ten, about the Pac-12 teams that join you, like USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. At what point do we start to see those schools start to run more of the traditional Big Ten type of domination? Like, Oregon has proved it again with another fantastic year, going 11-1. USC was in the mix of getting into the Big Ten championship game, but then blundered. UCLA is wishy-washy, and Washington is wishy-washy. However, I believe that Washington and not UCLA will get their generational 4-year teams where they're a threat. They got their Heisman Trophy winners. They're trying to make a statement. They run the tables, and it looks close. And it's a barn burner finish on top of that, ladies and gentlemen. But to keep that in mind, a game that could have been interesting, could have been fun if the teams are good, was Florida State and Florida. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. From the greatness of Florida State knocking off the Tide, but the Tide has been rolling on without any problems, to the swamp that was drained multiple times, and that's where they reside. It is tough. It's not an easy task. But, ladies and gentlemen, they have to find a way to win this game. But it should be a fun game. It's in-state rivalry. You can't really beat it. Now, in the group of 5 scenario, James Madison, not ranked, looking pretty. I want to just take a look at the American Conference. So, right now in the American Conference, you got North Texas, Navy, and Tulane in the picture. I want to say, I forget who gets in to it, but North Texas got everything needed to do to win. Navy and Tulane are both there with one loss in the conference. So I'm not too sure how that ends up shaking out. But again, North Texas, Navy, Tulane, right there in the mix. I believe Navy beat Tulane. That's why Navy's sitting where it's at right now. So that's how the American Conference is looking right now. So I think North Texas will get a rank by the end of this week, depending who falls in this glorious fashion. But I want to take a look where that school might be. James Madison in the Sun Belt. They are undefeated in conference play. They're going to play Old Dominion. No, they're not going to play Old Dominion because it's broken up East and West. So they'll play Southern Miss Golden Eagles for the Sun Belt Conference Championship game, I want to say, which is not bad. But their problem is they don't have ranked opponents. Is it enough for them to get in? What does James Madison have to do? Like, they joined the Sun Belt, and they're a group of 5, and they took care of business. Like, what do they have to do? I think they need to get ranked, and the ACC needs to blunder where James Madison can get in and have a crazy first playoff game. Like, if they beat a big school, the bandwagon, the hype behind James Madison will just keep adding to its momentum. The Dukes would find a way. It would be funny if Duke wins and you have James Madison going up against Duke, the Battle of the Dukes. I think we could have an ESPN Classic if that happens and you get somehow Duke in the college football playoffs, but Duke is not going to win the ACC. So there's a universe out there where that does happen. That's a fantastic fantasy to have, ladies and gentlemen. I think with the expanded playoffs, probably that would happen at some point. But, ladies and gentlemen, that is not where the football gods in the committee want this to happen this time around. But, oh, man. The Pac-12 is growing next year, so there will be more teams joining in. So hopefully they expand in playoffs and making that more of a group of 5. They're no longer Power 5 in that scenario. But my goodness. I mean, even in the Mountain West, you got New Mexico versus San Diego State most likely going into that matchup, with Boise State sitting number 3 with 6-2. A lot of 6-2s right there, but they're 8-4. So conference plays there. I think there's probably some head-to-heads mix and match in there, but they're really out of the picture for the most part. Mid-Atlantic Conference, the MAC on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I need to start investing a little bit in the MAC schools. I think with me being in Ohio, I had the opportunity to see some great MAC schools in action. I could take the drive to Akron. I could take the drive to Bowling Green. I could take the drive to Kent State, Miami of Ohio, Toledo, Ohio. Like I could literally travel to majority of these schools and be at those games and almost do like, a college game day for the MAC conference. If ETB gets to that point where we get sponsored by the MAC conference and covering those games, like to me, it's just like I hop in a car, we get like a nice little studio booth, and we record those games. A game that is going to be critical for the MAC. Those games are on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, so it's a bit tough to get there. But if it's one of those late slots, you just show up, talk about the game, and have a good time. I think we would definitely cover the MAC on the weekends if we had to drive and do all that stuff like that. It's like firsthand reporting at its finest. Like that's to me, that's the little college game day, I would say, for us. Like the MAC conference, there's a lot of people. Like if I could get like an Ohio squad going up, like MAC would be fun to just go around and tour. Like just waking up on Saturday morning saying we got a show at this time, but we got a 2-hour drive to get to Toledo. So like we gotta leave. I had to leave Columbus, Ohio by 8 o'clock to get up there by like 10 to set up, and then we record within that hour, and then we just go to the Toledo game, or we go to like Bowling Green. Like we get to do all that fun stuff. Or if I take the trip up, you go to Western Michigan, and then Central Michigan. Like there's stuff up there. Like I get to go to Buffalo. The hardest one that would probably be to do, ladies and gentlemen, is probably UMass. That's probably the one that will have to require a flight. But Northern Illinois, I can easily do. Like again, the MAC conference is great to drive around. I know I'm hyping up the MAC conference, but I think ETB should maybe start to think about capitalizing the MAC, even though they really don't have much at stake. I mean, Ohio Bobcats gave Ohio State some struggles in the first half. Like the MAC schools can play some ball. Like they can't beat the bigger schools, but they are giving good football where footballs do. Like tickets are not that expensive unless it's a big game that's coming through. Like it's fairly priced where we can get a lot of good opportunities to go and check out different college campuses. We can do nice little reels, literally capture it all going around the MAC conference. I think we probably should look into that, guys. We should definitely take the opportunity to look at the MAC conference some more, give it some more love, and help out more of the group of 5 schools. I think that's where maybe our opportunity starts to line up, and just go around the small conferences, talk to the students that are there, get to know what those college game days are like on those smaller campuses, and experience it, because it's really an interesting opportunity on top of like, I mean, with how spread out that we are, like we can really capture different things. Like Conference USA is more in the South, but you got Delaware, I guess New Mexico State's really not in the South. It's like the American Southwest. I mean, you got Louisiana, Florida International Panthers, Missouri State, Western Kentucky. Like I could see myself driving down to a Western Kentucky game if I had to do a broadcast. Like I could see that. That sounds like fun. So let's even look at the Sun Belt. Like you got Appalachian, Marshall, Georgia Southern, Coastal Carolina, Old Dominion, James Madison, Southern Miss, Troy. Again, more Southern schools, but I think where we're all based out at being like Northeast, few people on the West Coast, for cheap fares and the love of road trips, the MAC conference might be our new home, guys. Even though a lot of us on the network are Big Ten fans, but if we want to tap into that revenue, reach out to that conference and say, hey, if you can help us get your games on playback, we'll definitely cover those games and grow the MAC fan base. I think we could do that as a network, and it would be a fun experience for a lot of people on the network. I know I'm speaking hypotheticals before rivalry kicks off in 6 minutes, but I think we should get the discussions started. I think we should reach out, have playback, reach out to the MAC conference, get those games on our favorites so we can stream and have little watch parties for them and be big Max supporters. I know it's easy to join the Big Ten, SEC, and get those games, but I think it might be the start of the stepping stone to get more of the college games greenlit to have us do it. But then we have the whole TV marketing scenario with NBC, CBS, and all that stuff. But the Mac can create a little Mac network and they can give that to playback saying, here's all the Mac games that you want. Like, boom, we're in business. We'll get college football and we'll start with the Mac and we'll keep marching forward on top of that. But, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you get cozy, comfy. You got 5 minutes until the noon slate. I know I rambled on about the Mac conference, but I know you all probably say, that doesn't sound too bad if we, get a nice little tour bus, I would like to say. I almost feel like the college game day trucks and a production crew, and then just we'll snake around. Even if it's not these big conferences, there's so many other smaller conferences that we can talk with and try to cover and support. I think that's how we'll end up getting the popularity, being on those college campuses. And I don't want to say barstool level, but I think we can get to parts of the country where they don't get so much, the light of day, I like to call it, and get talked about. And I think we're definitely a platform to help those schools to be recognized and all the hard work and studio productions for what they do for their game days and find ways to support. Like, giving back to communities is always a great thing to do, especially around, Thanksgiving and other holidays, just giving back. So we could do that. That is fantastic. If not, we'll reach out to probably some schools, build some connections, rapport, cover sports for them, and then just be present and just getting student bodies, get student reporters to join and get their 2 cents and get people writing articles and just keep growing as a network and almost, like I said, make it like a bar stool, but we don't want the whole bad brand, I wanna say, what Barstool has, I would say, become, but what that looks like. Like, we're I would say, a better network in that sense. We're inclusive. We wanna make sure people have their opportunities, test out different things. We're definitely a network that will thrive and grow, and I believe everyone on this network to get that job done. But like I said, ladies and gentlemen, we are running out of time. I know I've rambled on quite a bit, but I think it's things that is a food for thought. Can for worms as we start to wrap up the college football season and gearing up to conference championship coming in that. Also, I believe I'll be getting my co-host in December. So we're going to be talking about the conference championship weekends with my co-host, hopefully next week, but we'll see on top of that. But fingers crossed, we're ready for college football weekend, ladies and gentlemen. My final thoughts for the remaining 2 minutes. I'm ready for the chaos of this week. I want the most crazy scenarios, the biggest upsets, the last play, the bad calls, the targeting, you name it. We want that to happen today. We want those games that are so controversial, it gives the committee a headache of who gets into the college football playoffs and who deserves to be a conference champion. And does losing your conference championship punish you that badly as it does in years past? Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, with a minute to spare, we are getting ready for Wild Card Weekend. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, and enjoy your Week 13 of the college football season. So long, and we'll catch you here next week for your conference championship games. So long for now. Bye-bye.